Thank you, Kellyanne. President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Mr. Pedro Shepherd, representatives of fraternal organizations, executive members of the Barbados Union of Teachers, featured speaker, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, specially invited guests, a pleasant good evening to each and every one of you. My name is Marcia Burt. I am the Public Relations Officer of the Barbados Union of Teachers, and I would like to officially welcome you to our 25th John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. And without further ado, I'm going to invite now the President of the Barbados Union of Teachers to say a few words.
Madam Chairperson, featured speaker, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, officials of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, representatives of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados, fraternal organizations, trustees, staff, former members of the Barbados Union of Teachers, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to bring a few remarks this evening on the occasion of the 25th Annual John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. This year, we are again challenged in our presentation as we continue to be restricted in what we do as a result of the COVID-19 protocols. However, the Barbados Union of Teachers remains resolute in the promotion of its annual Teachers Week. The late John Cumberbatch, of course, would have wanted it no other way. He would have fought against many odds to ensure that the Barbados Union of Teachers remained focused and strong in the promotion of its principles and philosophy. Nothing would have stopped him in ensuring that the rights of the teacher were protected. And so this evening, as we remember him, I want to assure you that this executive will do all in its power to represent its membership and by extension, all teachers of Barbados. Things might have seemed quiet within recent times, but I can assure you that the work has not lessened. We continue daily to address your concerns. Let me therefore lay all fears that the BUT has been silenced. The executive has been working closely with the Director General of the Ministry of the Civil Service in getting appointments and appointment letters done, having outstanding allowances paid to teachers, and most importantly, ensuring that all files and so on of members, or teachers rather, are updated and put together. We have been inundated with meetings both day and at night. As we listen tonight to what is expected to be a very inspiring and informative lecture from Dr. Yearwood, let me urge you to continue the struggle, stay focused and remain calm amidst all that this pandemic has brought on this nation. I know it is not easy being away from the classroom or from your students, but this too shall pass. I believe that there are solutions to our challenges, one of which is the conducting of an audit of our schools and the redistribution of students where practical to ensure that our classrooms no longer exceed 20 students, the size of our classrooms no longer exceed 20 students. Another solution would be to import 2 schools, maybe from China, and have them ready for January. But I'm sure that we can build schools in Barbados if there's any overflow. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not my night to expand on those solutions, so I will simply take this opportunity as we celebrate this annual Teachers Week to tell you that teachers are indeed at the heart of the recovery in education. There can be no recovery without us. I will therefore leave you in the capable hands of our featured speaker, who I am sure will give much food for thought. Enjoy tonight's lecture, enjoy tomorrow's professional development workshop, and Friday night's President's reception. Madam Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right. All right, so like I said earlier, we are here for the John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. And tonight, I just want to inform you that we are streaming via our YouTube page as well, not just only here on the Zoom. So we're gonna have people following us via the Barbados Union of Teachers YouTube channel, as well as here on the Zoom. So for persons who may want to ask questions, you must be signed into the Zoom, and others who are not able to can follow us on the YouTube channel. I am now going to invite Ms. Stacia Springer, executive member, to introduce our featured speaker for tonight. Stacia Springer. Stacia, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Dr. Yearwood holds a degree in political science, sociology and law, and postgraduate qualifications in education. He is a qualified lawyer in Barbados, England and Wales, and the British Virgin Islands, and also an educator. Yearwood is a Sheban scholar, national development scholar, and overseas research scholar. He attended the University of the West Indies, University of California, Berkeley University of Newcastle, University College of Law, and the Hugh Wooden Law School. He is currently a lecturer in law at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. He has also lectured at Durham Law School and the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He has practiced law at Ashurst and K&L Gates in London, and offshore at Conyers-Dale and Pierman in the British Virgin Islands. He has also worked in-house in the Treasury legal team of the investment bank Goldman Sachs International, London. He has also published papers on various topics, and his research includes governance, politics and law, and international economic law. Some of his most recent work examined utilization of politics in the Caribbean and the Republic in Barbados. In relation to education research, he has conducted education research with a colleague on law students at the UE entitled A Study on the Learning Styles of Law Students at a Caribbean Tertiary Institution, which was published in one of the leading legal educational journals, The Law Teacher. Yearwood writes a regular newspaper column, Outside the Box, exploring various socio-economic issues in Barbados, Caribbean, and the world. He has also delivered many public lectures, exploring governance and social economic issues. The most recent was the prestigious Oral Barrow Memorial Lecture titled Our Barrow's Legacy, a New Vision, which set out a new vision for Barbados that promotes social justice and economic enfranchisement. He also served as chairman of the board of management of the Alexandra School. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our featured speaker for tonight, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Stacia, and President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Council members, fellow Barbadians, and importantly, teachers. Thank you to the Barbados Union of Teachers for having me to deliver the John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture during Teachers Week. And to my fellow teachers, as we celebrate Teachers Week, we recall our service in what is the most noble of professions. It's really an honor to deliver the John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. And from what I understand, this is the 25th John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. And that makes it even more special. The last few years have been, for all of us in education, students, parents, teachers, it has been difficult. COVID has revealed many issues with the content, delivery, and the leadership of education in Barbados. COVID, and let us also set a few matters straight at the beginning of the lecture. COVID did not cause the issues related to curriculum reform, class size, use of technology and content and delivery of teaching, management of schools, and the other issues that we're faced with in education at the moment. COVID has simply exacerbated the issues. EduTech, the largest reform of education attempted in Barbados, was a failure. But COVID makes that more manifest, because if technology was integrated into our education system, as was to happen, we would not be at ground zero, in my view, regarding online teaching and learning. And what we also have to recognize and also face too is that successive governments of both political parties in Barbados have spent and continue to spend vast sums of money on education, over, I think, $500 million at the last check. And I doubt you could find many arguing, and many even on in this lecture, arguing that we have the educational system we want to match the level of spend that happens in education. I don't think that any minister of education in recent times has taken time to evaluate what that money gets spent on. There seems to be a focus on who sometimes gets contracts for school repairs, canteen concessions, but what about the value of the teacher? So by this evening, I hope to explain and apply the philosophy of John Cumberbatch, an educational maverick, a revolutionary, a radical, and one of, if not the main force behind the formation of the Barbados Union of Teachers as we know it. So pervasive was his vision and efforts to establish the BUT that it has been commented that the union can be divided into the period of John and the period after John. This lecture will be delivered in 3 parts. Part 1 will be a statement, an examination of John's philosophy. Part 2 will be an application of that philosophy to the current theme I've been asked to speak on, placing teachers at the heart of educational recovery, followed by Part 3, a conclusion calling for the BUT to recall John's radicalism and its purpose if teachers can come anywhere being near the center of educational recovery in Barbados. Now, in preparing for this evening and looking at previously available lectures, I recognize that none of the previous lectures I saw tried to frame or state or apply John's philosophy in a kind of holistic way that I intend to do tonight. In fact, John, from what I understand of him, would have rejected this lecture as a memorial. Stanley Mears, in responding to a question, how would you want to see John remembered, said, and I quote, "It would be good if some overt act of honoring John were taken. People name things after those who've made special contributions. Knowing John, I am not sure he would like such a deed on his behalf." So John's philosophy, if you like, is one of what I term radical educationalism. In fact, John, probably in abhorring a lecture in his honor, would abhor a label about what he was about, not because it's not appropriate, but he would have rejected any form of labeling. And it's interesting, if we take the radicalism of John, which I will shortly explain, and contain it into mainstream activities such as this memorial lecture, rather than live it out in the teaching profession to rebound to the benefits of Barbadians and students. Perhaps it's that human affliction to name things after we destroy them. A place could easily be called Greenfield long after the field was built over. Society has a way of either capturing or rejecting elements of change or genuine change agents. And no part of society has a way of capturing us, chaining us, or rejecting us as much as it can also liberate us and provide for social justice than that of education. John refused to be chained. Instead, he rejected society. He rejected a country that was not ready for his philosophy, as many young and generally Barbadians seem to do today, as our country and our educational system currently amble along with either no sense of purpose, contradictory purpose, or simply exclusionary to different views in the name of unity, as debate has become a dirty word. The debate around the transition to republic, for example, comes to mind, with a stated purpose of self-realization and liberation, but the status quo remains the same. Further contradiction abounds as we become a republic in name with the same independence constitution. And dare anyone to call into question the process of the transition to a republic as they're degenerated by a small, puerile, and pious faction. At the core of what I call John's philosophy of radical educationalism, which he exhibited in the way in which he lived his life, eventually rejecting the society around him that was not ready for his ideas and may still not be today, are what I see as three elements: equity, practicality, and radical leadership. What I will do now is to take you through each of these elements. Let's start with the first one. First element of John's radical educationalism is equity. This is perhaps the main element on which everything else John said and did was framed. It is the way in which John tried to frame the world and education as a tool to make and remake the world around him. Let us understand John's approach and practice to equity. When John returned to Barbados from Jamaica in 1965, he refused a teaching appointment at Harrison's College and chose a position as a teacher assistant at Parkinson Memorial. He promoted absolute zoning, seeing a complete overhaul of the educational system. He stated, and I quote, "There would be no common entrance exam. Pupils will automatically move from primary to secondary school." John was right in pinpointing that 11 plus as a source of inequity in our education system and advocating for its abolition, and to raise the level of all schools. Later research has demonstrated that the 11 plus produces a small number of highly educated young people at the expense of providing a less than exemplary education for the majority of secondary school students. A few top schools take the scholarships, whereas the majority of prison inmates from research shows come from the 8 lowest ranked secondary schools. The point is that our educational system breeds inequality and segregation that is reflected in the lives, the students' life chances. The question is, how do we create a more equitable system with full zoning and avoiding what could become a constituency or a kind of parish lottery system? For example, if parents want to send their child to a particular school, they would register or move as living in the zone, or some schools may be in a particularly affluent community and those become particularly affluent zones. So the majority of children going to schools in that zone are from a particular socioeconomic class. What we also recognize is that the abolition of the 11 plus is part of bringing equity into our education system. Its abolition is not a panacea for all of our societal ills. Removing the common interest does not address the inequality of wealth distribution that we have in this country. There's no denying, obviously, that education can be a way to help persons build wealth and have better life opportunities. My biggest fear, and probably the fear of many, is that the abolition of the common interest, if not carefully handled, could be a missed opportunity for addressing other social problems at the heart of which is the need to address inequality and provide for a generation of economically enfranchised and empowered Barbadians. We have to also focus on making schools better places to learn, and if we're in keeping with our theme tonight, better places to teach. More opportunities for teacher training, decentralization of power from the ministry to properly equip teachers and school boards to manage the schools, which brings me to the second element of John's philosophy. And also why the theme of this year's John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture, putting teachers at the heart of recovery, is important, because any improvement in our educational system can only be implemented by teachers. I know this as an educator, and unlike some, I'm not just saying this because of tonight's audience. The ministry can announce, but it is the rank and file of teachers that must implement change. Teachers will be the change agents. Change cannot happen unless the teachers are a fundamental part of what you're trying to do to change education. The second element, as I said, of John's radical educationalism is practicality. Ideas and change must be implemented. John's battles with both governments over providing better for teachers, as the BU2 magazine Outlook reflected, said it pushed his vision of society from the academic plane into the physical plane, and his thought became revolutionary. Therefore, it was about actually doing and making changes. However, also reported, and sadly so, John abandoned any hope of changing society from within and chose to do so from without. He, however, never gave up on trying to bring about meaningful change, but really what he was doing, he was deciding from what position he was going to make that change and what position was best to do so. His success was not only measurable in his battles, but by his ability to importantly inspire union members at the national and at the regional level to give of their talents and self to the union and its work to fight for and have the role of the teacher and the teacher recognized and respected as key to our society and our educational systems. Now, the third element of John's philosophy, radical leadership. How best can we understand what this means? We can start with John's own words. John stated, and I quote, "As far back as 1971, my ideas on the education system were so radical that I doubted would receive support even from those who were involved in the union struggle with me." In the story about John for the BUT Outlook magazine, it states that John saw the education system as perpetuating the racial and social class oppression of poor Black children. He saw it as socializing them to accept their own oppression and self-negation as the Black people. He realized that teachers were agents, therefore, of the political system and were circumscribed by its ideology. The magazine goes on to say that he became torn between the need to work within a system on the teacher's behalf and the contradiction of fighting for teachers' rights while perpetuating an oppressive ideology by being a practicing teacher. Radical leadership, therefore, requires a kind of self-realization of the role of the teacher in society as apart from your daily role of teaching. It is that provides for your reimagine, or how we as teachers reimagine education in bold ways and set out to actually try to move from that reimagination to that practicality, to that practical implementation. So I hope you're seeing how the three elements, if you like, of John's philosophy, his equity, the practicality, and a radical leadership come together to form John's philosophy, or what I label John's philosophy as educational radicalism. And that embodies those three elements. Each of them can easily be separated and constitute different discussions. But what I want to focus on this evening, given the theme of putting teachers at the heart of education recovery, is the application of John's philosophy of radical leadership. In the throne speech in, I think it was September 2020, the government stated that its intention was to reform the transfer from primary to secondary school. It went on to say, we, the government, will reform the common entrance exam, and we will work with all the stakeholders to make every school in Barbados a top school as promised, each specializing in different areas. What does this mean? What does the transfer to look like? I remember hearing an announcement about middle schools, but I can't remember seeing a program at Alderson's Teaching Training College or any other teaching institution to create middle school teachers. Or I have not seen a public plan for what schools would become middle schools, because I could not imagine it simply means building more buildings. EduTech, for example, descended into a building project. We have to guard against change in our education system, not simply involving, though always needed, no, let us not forget that, upgrading our physical infrastructure, but leaving actual policy and management changes untouched. And sometimes that is what reform and changes within education, and sometimes our broader society ends up. We end up with a lot of physical infrastructure, a lot of pretty buildings, but the actual policy change and the management changes that we need remain untouched. So what you get, shiny on the outside, hollow on the inside. Maybe that is the era of government and governance that we're in. But this means the call for radical leadership could not be more timely. That is, the point is that it is not clear what education change will look like from the government side. And if there's no leadership from the top, barring announcement followed by nothing, that is part of the problem. The removal of the 11+ is not a one-stop solution to education reform, as I've stated, nor is the vapid idea of trying to make every school a Harrison or Queen's College. What does that actually mean? Every school does not need to be an HC or QC. The only way educational zoning works is if students and parents view all schools similarly, which means the quality of the school plans are similar or of a similar standard, and the abilities of the teacher, and importantly, get this, the resources at the disposal of the teachers are similar. Every school needs to provide a good quality education and produce well-rounded citizens. That means schools can teach different subject matters and create their own brands of excellence. That is why radical education leadership is needed. I think part of putting teachers at the heart of education and the heart of educational change will have to occur on two fronts: decentralization of power from the ministry and central authorities to empower teachers, and more choice in the system to empower parents and students. I will focus the rest of the lecture on these 2 points. Let us start with choice. I believe that every school in Barbados does not need to offer the same educational program. We can introduce a range of schools. If some people feel that committed to an 11+, perhaps we retain 1 or 2, a few grammar schools with a modified entrance exam to cover subjects in art, sciences, languages, to address transfer to those schools, but really we introduce a range: international baccalaureate schools, academies of excellence. We introduce choice into the system. The idea is to give power to parents to decide what type of school their children should go to, and also prepare children for jobs beyond traditional professions. Providing free education was monumental to Barbados, but it was a one-size-fits-all educational system, and still is. Now we have options besides the common entrance, and we have different types of public schools not following the same program. That could be the next step. That could be the next big moment or change in education. And the second idea is decentralization. What does decentralization look like as part of radical leadership? The National Advisory Committee on Education recommended revisiting the question of centralization or devolution of some sections of policies, processes currently being centrally administered by the Ministry of Education back to their respective institutional arrangements. I will canter through a few of these ideas. So let's start with boards of management. These need to be empowered to run schools. I'm speaking broadly about secondary schools, obviously, and not have some principals trying to run schools as many fiefdoms. There are too many stories of principals exercising favoritism of resources, benefits, and promotions. In the present form, board of managements are decorated talk shops that can achieve little unless there's a really assertive, persuasive authority in the form of the board. Board chairs are expected to smile sweetly at graduation, readily hand over donations or resources to school principals, but at times how dare a board push for change, such as including teachers in the affairs of the school, whether to provide for more budget oversight, more training for teachers to have more training for teachers and for teachers to have a general say in how the school works, where the school goes, all for the benefit of the students. The ministry must realize, or rather, because the ministry knows, as highlighted in the National Advisory Committee on Education report I mentioned just now, so let me rephrase that, the ministry and the minister must do something about the centralization of power, and that has occurred over the years and accrued to super principals. Principals who seem at times unprepared to listen to students, parents, the community, teachers, while they're emboldened by a strong central ministry, and this is the irony of it, but at the same time with weak ministerial leadership, who is then unlikely to get changes in the system, especially when the rank and file of teachers are an afterthought to change. So take, for example, fixed term contracts that the minister has advocated for principals. This is short term, I think, in trying to shake up the system. I can see where they were going with this, where some supposedly educational leaders capture and hold schools and change to hostage. But it's a half measure at best, and at worst, it creates chaos without the actual change. But like most things, even though the minister spoke about it for years, there's nothing that we can see that's been done about it. This speaks to the second element of John's philosophy that we talked about, practicality and just getting things done. If you want to shake up the educational system, actual power has to be decentralized in a real way. Yes, fixed contracts can shorten the span of where schools and the system can be held hostage by a few individuals at the top, but it does not eliminate or reduce it unless combined with proper decentralization, where teachers are placed at the heart of education along with students, as we were discussing. Board of managements of schools are not therefore there to simply carry out the desires of a principal, but in part, sometimes they're there to protect the interests of students and teachers to help create better schools and better places for learning and better places for teaching. I want to look at the law, and you must forgive me because I'm also a lawyer after all, and I just want to look at some of the legal powers of the boards of management. So according to the Education Act, boards may make recommendations to the minister with regard to any matter directly or indirectly affecting any school or the development of secondary education generally. It goes on to talk about the fact that the board is responsible for implementing the minister's policy and may give directions of a general nature to the principal. The regulations, the educational regulations, also talk about the fact the board is responsible for general supervision, efficient maintenance of the school. The regulations further talk about the fact the board may require the principal in such forms that the minister may approve to provide certain information on the school, things that you would know about, attendance registers, log of significant events, and any other records that the minister may require. Further, according to that, any document that's referred to in the regulations must be made available to the board or any person authorized by the minister. Why did I canter through that? Why did we just have that little bit of legal discussion education? The point is that the law provides for effective authority of boards, which can be part of this decentralization of power from the center to the teachers. Why does it not happen? Lack of leadership. You can have all the law and no implementation or observance. So at the core, any changes in education cannot be from the center, but they must come from the teachers, as they will be the ones I mentioned before, who will have to be the change agents. Teachers have to be included in the decision-making process, and not a few town halls here or there, but as part of reform boards, moving power from the center to the margins. Why are there no teachers on school boards? And I'm not talking about the principal or the union rep, although I'm speaking to a union audience, but teachers that could provide views to be fed into school policy and daily practices. Shouldn't the boards meet regularly with the teachers? Part of radical leadership means empowering at the margins, but importantly, it also means providing resources. There's no point, for example, in asking teachers to lead and be change agents if you don't have the resources. So let us examine COVID and online teaching. Now, home internet is a tool that teachers need just like chalk on a chalkboard used to be a tool. All the talk about technology in education is rubbish without access to the internet. If teachers are to be at the heart of education recovery, then they must also be empowered through tools. I spoke about empowerment through process and decision making, but what I want to talk about now is empowerment through the tools that you as teachers will need. So schools not only need full and effective Wi-Fi, but teachers must be provided with full speedy internet at home. This far along the COVID pandemic, as I understand, the ministry should have negotiated discounted rates for teachers with telecommunications providers, or subsidize, or rather provide tax-free grants to all teachers to outfit their homes for online teaching. The ministry already has contracts with telecommunications providers for internet at schools. So why not add teachers as part of the deals? This is what leadership is about. And perhaps the ministry could take a leaf from the union's page in collective bargaining on these issues. Now, when teachers are empowered, and this is the flip side, it means that they are also prepared for feedback from students and parents. Students must be allowed to give respectful feedback on their educational experience. Student surveys should be done to give students an opportunity to have a say in their education, what resonates with them, what excites them as students, what makes it easier for them to learn. It is not to ask them which teachers they like or don't like. The point is that if and when teachers feel empowered in being part of a decision-making process and actually have the tools to do the job, receiving student feedback or any kind of feedback, whether it's from parents or PTAs, becomes part of that process and not something to be avoided. I also want to say something that everyone in the audience knows, but no Minister of Education ever seems to get. If you accept that teachers are at the heart of education, then teachers must want to be teachers. We must be capable, we must be motivated, and although money is not the solution, it is part of the solution. And you will never get to the solution without paying teachers what they are worth. Ministers of Education always like to talk about successful education systems in countries like Finland and Singapore, but what they often don't realize, or maybe they don't say, is that the main reason part of those successes is how teachers are treated and rewarded in those countries. Bear that in mind. Before I come to a close, I want to reflect a little on the Prime Minister's presentation to the Chamber of Commerce today. And you're probably asking why. The reason is pretty simple, really, because it could not have been more timely as we are discussing putting teachers at the heart of education recovery, and that we're discussing John's radical educationalism and what that means regarding change in education, bringing teachers from the margin to the center, or, I've talked about that, but maybe not even bring teachers from the margins to the center. Rather, maybe just empower them where they are. That could work. But what I found interesting today in terms of the Prime Minister talked about change in the way we do business, but why are we not having a big conversation and action about changing the way we do education? Teachers matter. Prime Minister asks, how did Barbados not have certain international compliant standards when it came to food processing and food industries, saying it was ridiculous? A participant also pointed out, for example, that our export businesses have declined since 2000s from hundreds to 38, and very few of our export businesses are owned by Barbadians. Prime Minister was quick to point out, and rightly so, that she didn't necessarily have a problem with Caribbean businesses coming to Barbados, but her problem was that the fact that Barbadian businesses don't seem to go into other Caribbean markets, and there's no drive and impetus. And here's the rub. And this is going to connect a lot of what we were talking about tonight. The issue is not that Caribbean businesses come here or that a non-Caribbean can lead the organization tasked with managing our top money earner tourism. That's not the issue. The Prime Minister is correct to point that out. But the issue, and this is the rub, and this is where the miss came, is whether we are preparing our students, our people, for the roles that we require. The bottom line is that irrespective of all the fancy talk, all the pretty talk you can want, the deep change required to move Barbados forward is not happening because I think of two things. The folks required, the people required to be part of the conversation are not part of the conversation. Take the recent constitutional changes, perfect example. And two, there is no alignment between the various parts of society and the economy, whether by design or accident. So the Chamber of Commerce is discussing change in society and economy and industry. Where is education? Where is the teacher? I am not sure the deep changes the Prime Minister is often so fond of and beautifully articulating regarding a new national identity, critical thinking, a progressive Barbadian who is proud and can grace the international stage. These things do not and will not happen by magic. You know how they happen? It is by education. And at the heart of that, I'm sure you guessed it, are teachers. They cannot be left out of these important conversations. There has to be a role for education, and importantly, there has to be a role for the teacher if we are going to really create that new progressive society that we want to, that we love to talk about, and move it in John's philosophy from the pages, from talking to actuality. If we're going to create that equitable society, that requires radical leadership. That requires practical action. I want to end, and I thought of ending by saying, let us recapture the spirit of John Cumberbatch. But you know something? John was never captured. Anything you read about John, John was never captured. How many in our current environment can say so? But as the BUT Outlook magazine reflected, John never lacked courage. We can all learn something from John Cumberbatch. The fight of the union is not the same today as it was with John. John, in reflecting on his own work and the focus to fight for teachers, stated, and I quote, "We had come through the oil crisis, Burroughs' prices and income policy, which could only deal with incomes, but never prices. Adams's threats of wage restraint, retrenchment, and his attack on teachers." This is John describing his environment. He talked about the fact that they faced in St. Vincent with tear gassing of teachers and beating of parents and children. You may not have those same battles. You teachers, we teachers, the union, our battles are different. We have a battle now with COVID and adjusting to online teaching, which I suspect when we return to face-to-face will never completely disappear. And in my view, nor should it. As we seek to become more agile, we seek to create better work-life balance and also better school-life balance and better teaching experiences and better learning experiences. So maybe it is time for the union to invoke the spirit of its founder and reclaim purpose. I challenge you to find and practice the radical educationalism of John. You are strong collectively and can be a force for change. I am sure what I've said tonight is not new to most of you as teachers. Even if I have told the story using John as the narrator, it is time to move your discussions from the staff meetings and the union notes to action as your students and their parents want better, and you can help them to get better. In John's spirit, I call you to action. You're compelled as guardians. I'm a teacher as well. We are compelled as guardians of this nation, its children, and its future. It's interesting that like that John, another John, our John, he went first, shouting in the wilderness, if you like, of the new age. Perhaps this time we will listen to his philosophy. We will embrace radical educationalism that he preached and he practiced. And instead, as is done to the other John, who was snuffed out. But if history is any lesson, the person may go, but we can never snuff out the light. There are always John Cumberbatches among us. Let us hear them and let them rise to the charge. I thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Morris. I'm going to now open the floor to the audience in case they have any questions or statements about your presentation. How it works is that if you have a question or even a statement, you'll use the icon to raise your hand. And I think I can see it on my screen, but if I can't, I would ask the first vice president to tell me who has their hand up so that they can make some contributions. So the floor is now open. Are there any hands?
I would go first. I didn't have my hand raised,
Okay.
but I wanted Dr. Yearwood to elaborate on his suggestion about teachers being on school boards. I know the minister has stopped that process where in the past teachers served on school boards, but that has been brought to an end. So I just would like him to elaborate more on that particular area.
Thank you. So if you look at the NACE report, and I guess you're making the point perfectly, it talked about decentralizing the power from the ministry and making the point that they had to kind of reclaim or go back to a lot of the practices before this power was centralized. And I think having teachers on school boards will be one of those things. I think there's value for the voice of the teacher to be there, not necessarily representative of the union or as a principal, but as teacher and as agent of change, because they can bring that perspective, because they are not encumbered by feeling that they're representative of a particular group, but they're speaking as a teacher. So I think there's real value in having teachers on school boards. And as you rightly pointed out, it's something that was stopped. And we need to revisit some of these policies, as Nace pointed out, if we are going to succeed in decentralizing power away from the ministry back to the teachers. And as I said, sometimes it's not necessarily about moving teachers closer to the center, because that can sometimes destroy the creativity and the very thing that we want from them. It's about actually empowering them where they are. So you meet them where they are so that they can be empowered as teacher in terms of the classroom and as agent of change, because whatever reforms, as I said, doesn't matter what you're doing, it has to end up in the classroom. It has to end up with the teacher implementing that curriculum reform. It has to end up with the teacher pushing that new value system. It has to implement with whatever you're trying to do, teachers have to be at the heart of it. So reform cannot be top down. And I know people always say that and give lip service to it, but really, if we want education to succeed and we want to make the changes that we want to create this progressive society with new national self-identity and self-actualization, etc., that our leadership sometimes is fond of talking about, that conversation has to really include teachers. There was another question here, if you don't mind me answering. I think it says, doesn't the existence of a teachers union not imply teachers are empowered? Teachers are not simple victims. John had grave problems with the union as with the state. No, that's a fair point. From my research on John, and from what I talked about, you could see that there was always that tension between what John was trying to do in terms of empowerment, make teachers' lives better, but also whether the union, as he would have seen it, was always the vehicle, and perhaps not necessarily the union, but John seemed to have things with the institutional frameworks that capture people and capturing them in a way that stops them from being able to reach their full potential, and not only reach their full potential, but capturing them in a way that silences them or creates mini versions of themselves, if you like, men, if you like, and women, who are not able to then articulate or create spaces for debate and change. So I think John had grave, you're right, problems with I think institutional frameworks as they operated, and you could see in his life he ended up rejecting it all because he didn't think that he was making the kind of progress that he probably wanted to make in terms of changing. And you can see he himself saying, my ideas were sometimes so radical, I don't even know if the people in the union who supported me would support these radical ideas.
All right, are there any more hands raised?
Galaxy Tab A has a hand in the air.
Oh.
Galaxy Tab.
Can you identify
Good
yourself,
evening.
please?
Yes, good evening. I'm Faye Beckles, Frederick Smith Secondary. Yes, my question also concerns the Board of Management, having more responsibility and leading the charge for teachers and students. I would want to suggest that if that would be so, that these persons should have some measure of, they should be somewhat steeped in education if they are to represent teachers and students rather than be more or less political appointees. Your thoughts on that, please?
That is a great point. I am glad you raised it because I can't raise everything. So I appreciate you raising that. And I agree. I think that a lot of the times that we do not put persons with the prerequisite skills on boards, and folks on school boards or people involved in educational management sometimes have no clue about education or its management, far less anything else. And they're on boards as political appointees. And that is part of the ruination of our educational system because they don't necessarily have the prerequisite tools to challenge whether it's the ministry or the minister or even challenge the principal because you're not an educator. So if I sat on a board, it's obvious that I can challenge an educator because I'm an educator. So when we talk policy, when we talk about learning outcomes, when we talk about learning styles, when we talk about philosophy and education, conservatism, we can have debates. If you don't have that background, that knowledge, then it's hard for you to make those challenges. And maybe sometimes it's intentional that persons on boards don't have that background because it creates less challenges in the system, it creates less debate, but it also does not provide for change and reform like you like to talk about. So you get this kind of dual tension. You want reform, you want change, but somehow you don't want the agents of change to be there to challenge and push the reform. So well, then you're not going to get it. You're going to get to talk about it. You're going to complain. You've not had it for 20 years. But hey, look at what you're doing. Who do you have as agents of change on these boards? You don't have teachers. You don't have educators. You don't have persons with the requisite background education. And I'm not saying everyone must, but there has to be a kind of capacity, as you're talking about, rightly so from the speaker, to push and understand what is needed in that change. And that can only come from requisite training. Someone said, I'm going to say a question here, Mr. believes that there will be a conflict of interest if active teachers on boards. I'm not sure where that would come from. That doesn't accord with good sense. I will leave it there. Someone says any attempt to be radical is seen as combative. And yes, that may be so, but at the same point, if you accept that it is your role and you are trying to be an agent of change, that is it. Doesn't matter how somebody sees you as combative or not. You're there to do the job, to represent teachers. You're there to push for the change that you want. You know, in my life, I've got all sorts of labels: troublemaker, trouble tree, always the guy, you know, raconteur. I mean, it is what it is. But if you believe in your heart and you understand your call to purpose to be a change agent and to try to create better spaces around you, you know what? You push ahead with that. You ignore labels of combativeness, you know, or what they are. And what's combative today and radical tomorrow, sometimes and radical today sometimes ends up being mainstream tomorrow. It's interesting. History always has a way of trying to capture radicals, and that's why I reflected on John's life so much in this lecture, because in some ways, by memorializing in the lecture, we are trying to capture him. We're trying to sanitize his memory in a way, for example, when you think about it, that people sanitize Martin Luther King as if he was this gentle man, but Martin Luther King was a rough change agent, you know, or we sanitize biblical figures, Jesus, everybody, eventually we capture them, Bob Marley, Che Guevara, we always sanitize them and then bring them into mainstream. And it's so interesting to watch our system do it for the very people that you would often, society would often be railing against. Martin Luther King was not a saint in his day. You had a society who rejected him. John Cumberbatch was a raconteur, you know, a combative, radical, educate. And now here we are celebrating his life. There is such irony in the way that our society operates to do this. And it always happens. We always take our leaders and we create this saintly vision of them. So it's okay to be combative now. One day you'll be put in a saintly mode, so it's okay. History has a way of doing that.
Hi, Dr. Yearwood. I have a couple of queries.
Mm-hmm.
If you hear me quickly. First of all, I'm still not clear in terms of any extension of your arguments about how the teacher in the classroom can be empowered. You know, a little bit more details on that if possible. The second thing is that, how do you see the relationship then with this, the board having all these more increased powers and vis-a-vis the principal, given that we've had some very outstanding principals, and I would name, for example, Matthew Farley, who have used, in my view, their own personality and their own vision and what's not to achieve what you might call radical change. So how is it going to work on one hand where you might have a principal who has a clear vision and is looking to achieve this radical change, and on the other hand, you have the board that is more empowered, it would appear, than the principal. Could you clarify your thoughts on those two things?
Okay, so I'll start with the last thing first. I read sections from the Education Act. So it's not necessarily about empowering the boards any more than they're already empowered. It's about actually doing what the law says. It's not that the boards don't have power. If you read the Education Act carefully, the boards can advise and the minister. The boards have a place to do that. We can actually advise the minister. Yeah. So it's not as if the boards don't have power at the moment. It's about how do you actually articulate and exercise that power. Over the years, through unofficial practice, through the way the boards are constituted, that power has waned away. And sometimes any exercise or attempt to do so is met with challenge. So that answers that particular question. So it's not about trying to destroy or remove principles. That is not it. But there has to be a role, and I think you must appreciate that, for empowering teachers. That doesn't mean you do it to the disadvantage of one group or the other, but you cannot have schools where teachers are not empowered. And what you've just done is a classic thing. You have personalized the issue by speaking of one principle. That is fine, but a system cannot operate on personality. I say this so many times when I do lectures on governance. It is fine. Barbados has always been treasured, and it's lovely that we've had great prime ministers over the years who never use their power the way they should, and we should always be proud. No, we should not. We should be worried. Do you know why? they may come that day. And it cannot depend on me and my personality that I'm going to decide to be good or to be bad or whatever it is. The system has to be designed to function outside or inside of your personality as a good principle, as you put it in inverted commas. And that's what we have to do. And that's what I'm arguing for. So I'm not saying they're not good principles out there. Of course, they're great principles out there. They're great teachers out there, but the entire system has to function. So we can't just pick and choose one or two people. Oh, you know, they were really good, so it's okay. No, like, oh, we've had really good leaders. Yes, that's fine. But what happens the day when you don't get that one and you do not have the system designed to accommodate for that? That's what we're building systems for. That's why we always want change. That's why we're going for reform.
All right. Just a reminder that we are encouraging persons to just raise their hands so that we can have a process going along the line of who's going to speak next. So Rudy, who's next?
I saw, can I,
Ian Marshall.
Marsha, I saw a
Yes,
question
please.
here. I saw a
Ian
question
Marshall is
here.
next,
Okay, all right.
followed
So,
by Abigail Chapman.
right,
Okay.
so Dr. Yearwood, you can go back into the chat if you wish, and then Ian
Yes.
Marshall is next.
Yeah, okay. I see a question here from, I think it's Dwayne. He's talking about, I used the word of reformation, radicalism. To what extent would you say education needs a revolution versus reformation? Too many people are talking, but okay. All right, we're talking about Finland, but nobody's making the moves. That is correct. I apologize, but I try to avoid using the word reform because I think reform is a bad word. Reform is often met, or the results of reform are often timid. As I said, often what we end up with physical development infrastructure, but we don't really change anything. And the things that need changing are left by the wayside. And we have this very shiny on the outside, but hollow on the inside. So I agree with you. Education doesn't need timid reform per se. What we need is educational revolution. We need that radicalism, and we need to just go big. We need to just decide, look, this is what we're going to do. I talked a lot of things about choice in the system. I talked about bringing teachers to the heart of the system. And I think if you do that, you can get more about teacher evaluation, because you can't be trying to evaluate me and give me scores, but you haven't given me the tools. What are you evaluating me on? So that's why if you recognize, I connected the idea of empowerment, not only to bring teachers to the decision-making process, but to give them the tools, because then evaluation, whether from students or parents, becomes a comfortable process. You have, so it's tied into the system. So all of these things have to work together, but they only work if teachers are actively part of it and they have the tools to do their job. So I agree with you that, we have to just take the steps and decide what kind of education system do we want? What kind of person are we trying to produce? And it goes back to that's why I ended that little reflection on what the Prime Minister was talking about at the Chamber of Commerce, because I think there was a rub and I think there was something missing there. It goes back to what type of person are we trying to create? And once we decide that, or once that discussion is had, at the heart of that discussion must be teachers, because that is where a lot of the creation of the individual will happen. It will happen in the classroom. It has to be an active decision that we are creating this type of citizenry. We're creating this type of progressive society. These things don't happen by accident, and we have to design it and take the affirmative steps, as the writer said, to make it happen.
Ian Marshall, sorry, is next.
Hi, good night, everybody. I want to start with agreeing, Dr. Yearwood, with your last comments pertaining to the timidity of not only the profession, but society as a whole. I for years have held the view that the profession is a very conservative profession. And it is the conservatism of the teachers that is really hurting the profession. I am a shop steward at the school at which I teach. And many times, we have had confrontations with the employer over issues, mostly industrial relation issues. Now, those issues have improved somewhat over the years, but there are many other schools that are still in desperate need of repairs, and they understand the money issue. But when I look around at the civil service, there are many actually buildings that are treated better than a lot of the schools that the teachers and the students are asked to work in on a daily basis. And I have issues with the slow pace at which we move, not only in teaching, but in the society as a whole. Now, you mentioned radicalism. Radicalism is a really relative term, because people can argue that Earl Barr was a radical when he ushered in independence, but to some that may be conservative. I am not one who goes much for labels. To me, it's more of a common sense approach. And I often tell my peers that we can change society with the stroke of a pen. But there are certain interest groups in this country who stand to benefit from the conservatism that we are steeped in. And that's a fact, right? So we keep, and I listen to Dr. Marshall. I share his passion for revamping the education system, not tinkering, but revamping the system. Exactly. We need to do that. And I know you share those views too. But as I said, the solidarity cannot be reached because of the conservatism of the teachers, because many teachers are called out. Many teachers are called to represent themselves. Teachers often relent due to criticism of the public. And then some may say, well, we have the children's teachers to teach. Okay? I believe that if you want change, there are certain things that you have to force. There are certain things that you have to do. Okay? And those things can only come about if teachers are prepared to make sacrifices. Now, I know that times have changed, because many teachers today are heavily indebted. There's fear. There's a lot more fear being mongered in society. And teachers nowadays get a lot more criticism, I believe, than in the past. So I do not know how we are going to move forward, but my point is that teachers have to be prepared to make sacrifices. I do not favor a piecemeal approach. I'm not one of those persons. I don't believe in special days. I believe if you're going to do something, you do it. I don't believe in tinkering here and tinkering there and move forward. That's not me, okay? Because I know that when certain interest groups in this country call for things, they get what they want. But when it comes to us, we are standing on the corner and we are afraid to take actions in our best interests. And so therefore we move through the system, and then we retire, and then a lot of teachers die. For what? Because of the issues that they may have picked up within the profession over the years that they may have experienced. So as I said, I don't know how much society has changed since those days when John Cumberbatch was doing his thing. And like John Cumberbatch, I understand his position because I've done a lot of research on him, and I have refused, or I have resisted, use that term, efforts to join the executive, because I cannot deal with nonsense. I can't deal with gradualism. I can't deal with piecemeal approaches. And I've told my peers that. And I've said over the years that if we are to move forward, we need to take concrete steps in order to secure the profession and in order to get what is rightfully ours. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that contribution, Ian. That no, I don't think there's anything that I can disagree with there, and in some ways, Ian, you sound very much in the spirit of John. I mean, that's exactly what John eventually did, because he was, I don't think this gradualism, sitting on boards and sitting in helps, and because we're never going to get the change that we want. And in some ways, maybe he's proven right, because we're still having these debates. We're still here arguing about the fact that this lecture is titled "Putting Teachers at the Center, the Heart of Education Recovery" tells you everything. That means that there's this almost the fact that teachers aren't at the center of our education. And that's problematic. So if they're not at the center, if they're not part of the processes, where are they? When they're the ones delivering the education, when they're the ones who are actually going to be the change agents and implementing the policy. I saw a quote in the chat: how can we have a committee on education reform without unions being invited? Well, then that within itself is ridiculous. To use some earlier language from our leadership today, that's ridiculous. Because how then are you having educational reform? How are you going to be making the changes if teachers, and I know that the comments about unions, but unions are represented, but let's just broaden out: unions, teachers, if they're not part of that process, if this is factual, and if this is so, then why doesn't the rest or the broader society know or understand these things? Why is there a quietism on the issues? I agree there with Ian. If you want change, you have to push for it. This piecemeal approach does not work. You set out, you think this is the big roadmap, this is where we're going, because what happens is that if you do piecemeal along the way, processes get hijacked. And by the time you get to the next part of the change, well, the first part is old. You're still trying to catch up with that, and then you're trying to add on something. Think about what we want to do with education. Stand united, your group. You just say, look, this is what we want to do. This is what we're going to go forward with. There is heavy criticism of our profession, and that's our profession at all levels. From primary, secondary, university, we all feel it. We all feel that as professionals, we are critiqued more by society. We are critiqued more by our students. We have more outputs that we have to give. There's more pastoral care involved. There's more of everything. There's more of everything, but sometimes less of resources to achieve these things. But somehow, this is often a problem of our own making. We still do it. We still get through, and then the persons at the top go, well, actually, well, you still delivered, so maybe you don't need the resources. And we keep delivering, irrespective of the fact that we're complaining of lack of resources, lack of proper facilities, rather than saying, you know what, I am not going to deliver today because I don't have the things, and I've been trying, I'm pushing this for the benefit of people, children, for everybody, but this is not right. And perhaps that day has to come where we draw that line in the sand and say, no more. And we have to do that together as a collective. No more. Some of us can't decide, you know what, I can still try. No. If we've all decided this is where we're going, this is the kind of education system that we want, instead of this tinkering, piecemeal, half-hearted, kind of approach about educational reform or educational change, because I don't like that word. So we either do it or we don't do it. What does it say? Put up, what did it say? Put up or shut up? Maybe that's what it comes down to.
All right, Abigail Trotman.
Good night to everyone. I like the last statement that the speaker made, put up or shut up. And it's about time that the ministry is told that, because the Ministry of Education are expecting that the bricks are going to be made without even the straw, just like how the Egyptians had to go and look, the Israelite slaves had to go and look for the straw to make the bricks. These places that you mentioned earlier about their systems like Singapore and Finland and so on, and even Canada and places, The resources are there for the teachers to use. This afternoon, I'm sitting here looking at Edu2, which is the media resource department's site for whatever they think that are resources for teachers. And I'm there saying, but wait, we are supposed to be teaching online. Where are the resources that you would expect will be available there? Every teacher has to go and look all about up, down, and around, learn this. You have to do this while you are setting work in the classes. You are putting things online. There's no place for these things to be found that are designed to put in the classroom for children to use. And every time you go and find something on YouTube, you have to spend the time as a teacher, especially at the primary level, to listen to it, to see if it is suitable, to see if the language is correct, if the words are pronounced properly. There's a lot of resources there, but a lot of them are not suitable for our audience or the people that we are using. And the chief place where we should find these resources is so far behind that time, out of there, out of step. And yet, as you said, we are trying hard, trying to do so much. And a lot of us spend time competing against each other, trying to win the favor of the person who is the school administrator. That we forget that these children will pass from our hand and go to someone else. And what we have, we could share. I had to tell another teacher, but there are so many teachers in Barbados who have published things, who actually have them on the internet. And these things should be incorporated into resources. A few times, half-heartedly, before COVID, there were requests for things to be submitted. I would have thought that now that we are online and that we really need those electronic types of things, that they would have really updated themselves. Even sometimes you go and you look for the basic curriculum and it is missing. I had asked people at Resource earlier last year, but where is the curriculum for music in the primary school? It was up at, oh, we were doing something with it, but school had begun. Why was it not there? So all this talk, they say, oh, we are giving you resources. So they send you to training. A lot of the training either does not relate to really what you have to do during the day, or they give you half. Like for example, teachers were told to go and do the robotic program, the VEX robotic programs. And the majority of the teachers in the primary schools that were told to go and do those programs, they not even have the robot to practice on. I don't know how you are going to be able to really effectively, like me, who needs the manipulatives to really help me remember, to transfer that information to children if you yourself don't even have the opportunity to practice on them. Or they are there, but we are not seeing them. So all the talk that is being talking about education reform or educational change, teachers are the heart of this all, and it needs that people recognize and be prepared to give us the real tools, not the ones that they thought that is going to happen. They're talking about, oh, the children don't have computers, but you know that teachers had to make noise, and some teachers haven't gotten any, had to make noise to get computers themselves in order to teach. If it wasn't for the fact that no teaching will happen online, if some teachers did not have computers, they would not have gotten any, because they didn't say, well, all teachers will be given computers. They say you have to send an app. So the one that saw the circular they fill up the form and they got. But the ones that didn't see the circle didn't get. And many teachers had to go and pull their pockets to buy new devices because of the demand that was made on the ones they had been since the first shutdown that was in 2019. So they need to, the authority in education needs to do more than give us a lot of talk and a lot of directions that frankly makes little sense to most of us who are teachers. I thank you.
You know, that was a very fulsome comment, and the part in terms of provision of resources is important to the empowerment process. And you know, as I said, I don't think that I was saying anything that necessarily a lot of teachers don't know, but maybe sometimes the things that I said will surprise the public. And I think what I did that was novel was just to use John as my narrator. It was almost like trying to speak to John and think, okay, I have to make this into a story about what John represented and what he was trying to do. This is the way to do it. So I appreciate the point they're made about technology, because you can't be talking about online schooling, technology in schools. They said it's rubbish if teachers don't have access to the internet or they don't have access to the resources. And they should be assisted to provide it with those resources. You can't have them no computers, no internet. These things, the same way that some students don't have access to Wi-Fi, some students just don't have tablets. And this is 2 years? Is this 2 years? Yeah, 2 years, and we're still talking about these things. Where is the provision of the resources? Why isn't there being collective negotiation through the ministry to provide grants or funding or tax-free allowances for internet, for resources to outfit your homes as offices? Because a lot of us who are teachers, you didn't bring your work home in that 24/7 way, so you never outfitted your homes or offices in that way you would need to teach. But that's what is required now. That comes at a cost. That comes at a cost of already strained salaries and other resources and provisions for your families. So there has to be some step up. And I like what one of the previous commenters said. We seem to find money for all sorts of things. We have to find money for our teachers. That's what it comes. And we already spend $500,000 on education. Where is the money going? We need to probably sit down and really have a think about how are we going to get value for money? Where do the resources need to go? And how do we get them to the people that need them?
Yes, well said, Dr. Yearwood. There's quite a bit of messages and comments in the chat.
Okay, I'm just going through a few. Many teachers have been made to feel that everyone can teach and our opinions don't matter. We're disrespected. So that's a cultural issue. I agree that we need to start to respect teachers and the profession that they do. But those kind of cues have to come sometimes from the leadership, whether at the ministerial or the administrative level. And society sometimes are sensitive to leadership, and sometimes we don't pay enough attention at the leadership level. You have to pay attention to your nonverbal cues, how you're responding to teachers. Sometimes it's just the way that and that sends a signal to the rest of the society to think, you know what, I don't have to respect that law because I'm seeing some cues from the top that says we don't care about them, or their interests are not at heart. And the rest of society, sometimes not even realizing they're following along. So you have to be very, very careful, I think, when you're in these leadership positions, how you're responding to part of your agents of change. Because as we said, all the talk about educational reform and educational change, you don't have teachers on board, you're not going anywhere. Who's going to go and teach? Who's teaching it? It's not like the ministry was going to turn up and teach every single class. You have to have teachers, so they have to be made to feel they're part of the process, and that means talking to them in a real way. That means including them as part of our agents and systems of change. Says here, government's philosophy on education greatly influences. That's true. That's exactly what we were just talking about. So cues, leadership cues, and what messages are you sending to the rest of society of how it should respond to teachers. And part of it, as I mentioned earlier, everything is not about money, but we have to perhaps find ways that we can reward teachers either monetarily or in other ways for them to raise the level of the profession, and not only to encourage new people in the profession, but to also reward people who stayed in the profession, who could have gone off and done other things. But as I said, a lot of us in this profession, we feel called to it. This is part of our service, and teaching is a vocation that runs deep within many of us, and we're proud of what we do. We're proud of our students. We're proud of the outputs that we give. But at the same point, we also have families and to feed and lives to live, and there has to be that balance and appreciation for what is arguably one of the most important roles in our society. It must be teachers. A lot of people give lip service to that. Oh, teachers are so important. Teachers Day, Teachers Week. And then when it's over, when you're looking for your allies, where are they? Where are the allies? Where are all these people that shouting teachers are great? Where the provision of services and helping you to fight for your resources. And I'm not saying you do this at the expense of anybody else. And I'm not trying to reinstitute a kind of teacher-centered education of it, because I think you have to have some student-centered, but we need a balance between student-centered education approaches and teacher-centered approaches. So we kind of get that sweet spot in the middle.
All right, Rudy, Level.
Yes, thank you, Martha. Dr. Yearwood, I'm going to put you on the spot a little, so I hope you don't mind.
Oh dear.
You spoke of changing the education system. I want to know, how will you reorganize the system from primary to secondary level? For example, yearly, we award scholarships for a particular category of students. Yet those from the so-called Big 8 schools that you spoke of are never eligible for scholarships. However, they say that all schools are equal. I keep on hearing that every year. I posit that recovery will be easier with equality. Children need to be part of the recovery process. How would you include our children in the recovery process?
Okay, Rudy, that's a big question. Let me think. I'm thinking through this, because I'm not trying to give you.
Let me add a little something to it, because
oh dear, you're adding more, Rudy. Why you doing this
award
to me?
scholarships to those students who are at the so-called top schools. We have students at the lower schools who do excellent every single year. You can pick out a category of student, but yet still, I have never heard in my lifetime a student from, let's say I can call my school, because I teach at the Grantley Adams, St. George, Darrell Jordan, Frederick Smith, given an award, a national scholarship, consistent with those that are given to the students from, I can call names, Harrison College, Queens College, but yet still we're talking about equality. So even if we change the education system in terms of the teachers, how are we going to pull the students along and making them feel valuable?
Okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, so that's a big task. I think what it would require is teacher empowerment on one side, as I talked about, but also student empowerment on the other side. And I'm sure I mentioned it in the lecture that we can't just talk about all schools being similar. We have to ensure that all schools have similar resources and similar quality of legible teachers to kind of institute that similarity and level out across the board. And I don't think that leveling out process will occur overnight. That's not probably a 1 year or 2 year job. We're talking about something over time. But in the meantime, to encourage that process, you're right, there should be awards and scholarships at a national level to students who excel at all schools. Right now, our scholarships are of such, and they are designed to fit a particular type of student and a particular type of Barbadian that we are trying to produce, who are then reproduced in our political system, who reproduce the same type of education system, and then we complain, why are we not getting any change? Well, you know, you're putting the same people there doing the same things. So if you want to break the system so much, or you want to break into the system, you have to place different people and different perspectives in the system. And part of that would be to change our award system. And you're right. Why aren't there awards created for different types of students at the national level to encourage them in different areas? And I hate that divide that we make between academic people and people who are supposed to be good with their hands, as if there is something wrong with having technical and high technical level skills as a different to kind of more book-driven subjects. And I think that is a dangerous divide, and we need to start rewarding and awarding students at all levels and across all subject areas and across all skill sets, and raising them to that standard. I'm sure I've heard talk about it, but I've not seen an outlay of the award system. I'm sure people have talked about reforming their award system, but nobody actually does anything. Because again, it's perpetuation of the same cycle, same system, through the mill. You go to a particular school, you join a particular organization, you become part of the leadership of society, then you do the same thing. And it's round and round and round. And then we have these endless debates about change, but we're not putting change agents, or we're not creating space for change agents to break through. Or sometimes we just don't support them the same way John in his life had the point. Is like, you know, society just wasn't ready. And then you start to question, are we ready for the radicalism of a John Cumberbatch? Are we ready to do the things that John Cumberbatch was talking about in the 1970s to create the equity that you're talking about, Rudy? Are we actually ready? Is it just one or two people? Or even when we recognize it's a problem as a whole society, we still can't find it within ourselves to take the step. So there's a lot of long talk, a lot of pretty talk. We know it, we see it from the leadership currently of our country, self-actualization and coming into our own, and we're gonna step into a new century as a new people. But what does that really mean? And that goes back to the point you're making, Rudy, because how are you self-actualization and stepping into yourself when you are treating other students from some schools as second-class citizens because you're not giving them the same awards? This is why I talk about shiny on the outside, hollow on the inside.
All right. Candace Griffith.
Yes, please. Good night, Dr. Yearwood. You spoke about, empowering teachers through tools, and as you would have heard from several of our sisters and brothers already, that's a sore point for us. My question really is, what would be your ideas and suggestions for teachers in order to agitate for outfitting our homes with adequate equipment? Because we have the case where poor internet is a real issue for many teachers. I have teachers at my school, when the rain falls, the internet drops out. We have teachers with back pain from sitting in chairs that aren't adequate. We don't have ergonomic chairs at home. We barely have them at school. How would you suggest that we go forward to agitate for, empowering teachers through these tools?
I think part of the process for agitation, you just identified it. You just have to do it. You know what what is needed. You do a kind of census among teachers. How many teachers need chairs? How many teachers need internet? You say, look, ministry, this is it. These are the things we want. We want you to go forward, talk to the telecoms on our behalf. Union, this is what you need to do. Talk to the telecoms, get the ministry on board. We understand it's economic times. You may not be able to give us a whole tax-free. Can some of this cost be subsidized? Because we need to outfit our homes with internet. We need these economic chairs. We need these things to teach. So you just have to put it on the table and, make a lot of noise. Sometimes that's all it comes down to, make a lot of noise, because parents also need to understand. And I think for the first time, especially if you track social media, a lot of parents finally, that their kids are at home, understand what teachers go through. They finally get the day in a life of a teacher, because they themselves now have to be part of the process of kind of monitoring their children, especially of a certain age, even when they're not, to make sure the work is done, because you're trying to manage an entire online class with like 10 and 9-year-olds can be difficult. Let's be realistic. Even if they're 16 and 50, that can still have its own issues. And for the first time, a lot on social media, you see parents going, "Oh my God, I never realized what a teacher did." I'm like, really? You didn't realize that being a teacher was this hard? But it takes a special person to actually submit every single day, get up, go into a space where you're facing hundreds of students with hundreds of different personalities, hundreds of different problems, all coming at you, all needing something from you. And you still have to go home at the end of the day to give something to your own family. I always tell people, if I have a class, and sometimes I'll teach a class, I'll lecture, you're like, 180 something students, especially face to face, you're feeling that 180 something people, whatever they're going through, that's being directed to you. Whether that's the tone of how they're answering their questions, whether that's the way they're sitting in the chair, whether that's the energy they're giving off, whatever is going on in their life, whether they had a bad morning at home because the parent didn't do this, or their friend did this, or their whatever, they didn't have breakfast, they don't have enough money, they barely make it to school, they're working part-time to get through UE, they may not have the support, all of that is coming at you. You have to process it, and you know what? You still have to teach. You still have to get through whatever's on that syllabus, because at the end of the day, they have to be certified as competent in your subject area to get the degree, to get the CXC, to get the certification, to pass out of school, to get the job. There still has to be that practical element to it. But being a teacher is hard. It takes a lot out of you. And many of us in the profession, I'm not saying that they're not teachers who may not do their job, but many of us give of our best. In fact, we give more than our best to get through and to make sure our students get through at the end of the day. So I would say to do it and to get what you need, sometimes you gotta keep a lot of noise. And you have to let people know. Sometimes I don't think large society understands what a teacher is about and what you do. You always hear, "Oh, you get holidays." I'm like, really? You think summer is a holiday? I would like you to know the training, the marking, the prep for the next term. And then sometimes you're just so exhausted from the term before, you need a little break, to have a mental break, to rev up, to design a new course, to have your strategy meetings, your management, all of these things, And it's so interesting that a lot of people only recently recognize what teachers go through and what we do, because they've been faced with their own kids at home in a kind of quasi-teaching environment. I've seen a lot of that on social media, and I just smile, because you're like, okay, now you get it. Now you get what we're doing. Because some people, I feel, they think that you just sit there and we do nothing, They're like, "Oh, you just teach. You just teach." I'm like, really? You know what? You should come and try this for a day. Most of them won't last. They won't last. You probably run into the class crying. That's at all levels. That's whether you're primary, secondary, or university. Yeah.
So
So
true.
keep some noise. Keep noise. Let people know what you want, and let the PTAs know. Let everybody know, because if your back hurting you, you can't. And these are realities. Like, most of us don't have this stuff at home. Who has an ergonomic chair at home? Your houses are designed for your comfort and to leave your job at home. Now we have to take our jobs at home, so you have to kind of redesign your space, and it needs to be comfortable.
All right, so true. Dr. Yearwood, I'm not seeing any more hands. You just want to take a quick look in the chat before we wrap up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then those were just a few comments. Rather
Right,
than,
okay.
Yeah, specific to respond to.
Lovely. All righty. So I'm going to now invite Sister Candace Griffith to move the vote of thanks.
Good night, everyone. On behalf of the members and the executive of the Barbados Union of Teachers, let me say thank you to our featured speaker, our guest speaker, for delivering tonight's lecture. Dr. Yearwood, thank you for taking the time out to examine John's philosophy and for making him a major part of tonight's lecture. As you said when you reviewed, this isn't always the case. Thank you for the insight and the knowledge you offered tonight. There are many key points that we can definitely hold on to as we become change agents. Thank you for reminding us that any improvement in the education system must be implemented by teachers. I welcome and support the position that we are indeed change agents. I also welcome the challenge to revive the radicalism of John Cumberbatch, as this attribute is still constantly spoken of in and around the union. I trust that we, the current executive, have been stirred to become radical leaders and will dare to ruffle quite a few more feathers going forward. So again, Dr. Yearwood, please accept our gratitude to you for delivering an interesting and motivating lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're most welcome. It was a pleasure.
Okay.
Brothers and sisters, an event such as this one could not be pulled together overnight. The planning for tonight's lecture started quite some time ago. To this end, I want to say thank you to all the members of the executive committee for the thoughts and planning put into making tonight's lecture a success. I offer a special thank you to the Public Relations Officer, Sister Marsha Burke, who was our chairperson for tonight, and to the members of our Public Relations Committee who have done their part to contribute to making this lecture the success it has been. I wish to offer a special thank you to our president, Brother Pedro Shepherd, for his interesting and timely remarks. Thank you, Mr. President. I also offer a special thank you to Sister Kellyanne Trotman Clark for asking God's blessings upon tonight's proceedings. Likewise, thank you, Sister Stacia Springer, one of our executive members, for eloquently introducing our guest speaker. Brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us for this, the 25th John Cumberbatch Memorial Lecture. Your presence and participation are major aspects of each lecture. Tonight wouldn't have been possible without you, so thank you. If I have by any chance failed to mention anyone who has contributed to tonight's lecture in one way or another, please accept this as my thank you to you. No matter how small a contribution you have made, you deserve gratitude. Again, I say, thank you.
And Candace, thank you as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our John Cumberbatch lecture for 2021. But before you go, I would just like to inform you of the upcoming activities, remainder of activities for our Teachers Week. Members, you're encouraged, if you haven't already registered, to register for our professional development workshops, which are tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then we culminate the Barbados Union of Teachers Teachers Week with the President's Reception, which would be streamed live via the Barbados Union of Teachers YouTube channel. So once again, to each and every one of you, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Yearwood, thank you so much. And I want to wish each and every one of you a safe remainder of the rest of your evening. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.